I'm holding a Graco 50 Classic Ride child seat, which can only mean one thing. It's time for our weekly child seat review. And the vehicle before us today is a Mercedes-Benz CLA 250. Now, I've received quite a lot of feedback from our viewers about the Mercedes-Benz CLA. Everybody's been wanting me to do a review on it, so the full review will be coming up in a few days. But for now, we're just going to be taking a look at this vehicle with child seats in mind. The questions I've had from viewers all boil down to this. The CLA 250 starts at $29,900, so a Mercedes for under $30,000. Why would I buy something like a Ford Fusion or a Honda Accord over this Mercedes? The answer, not to spoil things, really is size, because the CLA 250 may look like a decently sized vehicle, but it actually is fairly small. Of course, vehicle size is all relative, and the CLA isn't exactly a smart car, but neither is it a full-sized car or a mid-sized car as we know them. That really is obvious in the back seat. We get an awful lot less rear seat room than you would in a solid mid-sized sedan, and you get an awful lot less width in the vehicle overall. The CLA is based on the Mercedes-Benz A-Class in Europe, and while the A-Class is a relatively decently sized vehicle in Europe, in America it comes across as relatively narrow. The size of the CLA is very obvious in this rearward-facing child seat test. This rear-facing child seat really won't fit properly in the back seat with me in the driver's seat. And with this other seat all the way back in its tracks, there's almost no legroom in the back, so I couldn't really sit behind myself or put a child seat over here on the passenger side. Moving up to the front seat, I'm going to find out how far I have to move this seat forward in order so that rearward-facing child seat will fit properly. And you do want about 1.5 inches to 2 inches or more of room between the rearward-facing child seat and the back of the driver's seat, because in a rear-end style accident, this front seat will move because you're going to have a few hundred pounds in it, and that's going to be amplified by the force of the accident. And so you do want to make sure there's sufficient room between that seat and the rearward-facing child seat for proper safety. So, as you can see, you do have to get fairly close to the steering wheel. We do, of course, have a tilt telescoping steering column, so that doesn't really pose that much of a safety issue for the driver. We can make the seat a little bit more upright to compensate there. But as you can see, the CLA 250 isn't the biggest vehicle. Before we go much further, we do need to talk about true competition for the CLA 250, because I'm not entirely convinced it is the Fusion or the Accord buyer. The CLA 250 may be about the same price starting as a very high-end Ford Fusion or Honda Accord, but once you add a few options, this car can easily get up to $45,000 fairly quickly. Now, with prices like that, this car doesn't really compete with those options. This competes more with something like a Volvo C60 on the low end, or an Audi A3, or something in that category. Someone that's shopping for that kind of vehicle and wants to step up or step across into the Mercedes-Benz brand. Another possible cross shopper is the BMW 2 Series shopper. Now, the 2 Series used to be called the 1 Series, and BMW is trying some renumbering confusion on us. But the 2 Series is a two-door coupe entry-level BMW. Someone shopping in that particular category may think to themselves, why don't I try a Mercedes-Benz that has 4 doors around the same price point instead of the 2 doors, because it could be a little bit more practical. All of these vehicles that I'm talking about, however, are considerably smaller than a Fusion or an Accord. Now, I know that there will be some people shopping in that neighborhood that are saying, I want a Fusion or an Accord or a Camry or another mid-size sedan, and this isn't that big of a bump up in the base price, but you do need to keep in mind that it is going to be a much smaller vehicle. That's not to say that Mercedes doesn't want the Accord, Camry, Mazda 6, Fusion shoppers, etc., to be looking at something like a CLA 250 for a small step up in price, because of course that's how we introduce new people to the brand. You just need to keep in mind that if that describes you and you're shopping for the average mid-size sedan and you're looking at the CLA as an alternative, that the rear seats are going to be considerably smaller, because this isn't quite the same kind of vehicle that you're shopping in that normal mainstream mid-size segment. Now, with all of my caveats and warnings in mind, let's take a look at the forward-facing child seat installation. Because of the way these CLA rear seats are shaped, it is a little bit difficult to get a rearward-facing child seat into position and latch down properly. You can see that this rear foot isn't all the way back against the seat back, and that's because in order to have the ball in the green zone, which is something you need to do on these forward-facing child seats, you have to have it positioned kind of far forward, because if we actually snug this right up against the seat back, the ball ends up in the red zone, and that's not appropriate. So it does have to be in this particular position. That's because of the way these headrests are shaped. These are not removable headrests. They're all integrated in the CLA, and that's both in the front seats and in the rear seats. These are not adjustable up front, and these are not adjustable in the rear either. Like most vehicles sold in the US, we have latch anchors for the outboard seats only, and we have top tether anchors for all 3 seat positions. A single center-mounted child seat installs very easily in the CLA 250 because the seat back and the seat bottom angles work well with one another, and they enable the child seat to sit very properly in the seat, get latched in relatively easily. If you do need to remove the headrest for your particular child seat in the car, you may need to seek the assistance of the Mercedes dealer because it doesn't come off very easily. Another thing to keep in mind is the top tether anchor in this car is a little bit peculiar. Most cars have a bar inside the top tether anchor section, just like the bottom anchor that I showed you earlier. This particular car has a large piece of sheet steel that has a square hole punched out of it. That means the top tether anchor in this Graco child seat would not fit in the proper configuration. I actually had to rotate the buckle and then buckle it in. I'm assuming that that's not a problem because I was unable to find any information in the Graco Classic Ride manual about turning around the top tether anchor, but it is something that did concern me just a little bit. So if your particular child seat has anchors that are very much like this Graco Classic Ride 50 child seat, that may be a problem. If you do plan on using a child seat inside the CLA 250, I suggest you take the child seat with you when you're actually test driving the car. Make sure you can get it in the car and make sure it works for you with the people that you plan on putting in the front. I'm going to go ahead and close this door and see how well I fit. And overall, the CLA 250 is a little bit snug. This is not a terribly large car, as I said earlier. It's really obvious because things are a little bit narrow across the side. I wasn't able to fit 3 child seats in the back, and even 2 child seats was a decent squeeze. Sticking adults in the rear bench seat in this car isn't going to be a terribly common occurrence anyway, because I can't really sit upright in this seat even if there was a child seat in here with me, and even if we didn't have the moonroof in this car, because the moonroof doesn't really affect headroom in the back. And as you can see, I have to actually cock my head to one side to sit back in this seat. If you slouch, you can do that, but my rear end is not against the back of the seat. So if I was going to sit upright and have my back against the backrest in this car, I do have to have my head cocked very uncomfortably to the side in order to fit back here. So in some respects, adults and child seats, not a terribly common occurrence in the back of the CLA 250. Well, it is possible to fit 2 child seats across the back of the CLA 250. This particular configuration is a little bit tight, and it wasn't possible to fit 3 child seats across the back. If you do need to put 3 child seats in the back of your CLA, then you're going to need to find much thinner child seats than these Graco Classic Ride 50 child seats. These are approximately average in terms of width, so it is definitely possible to find narrower child seats to fit in the back of a vehicle. That is something that you need to do in a CLA 250 if you needed to fit 3 across. As far as 2 across child seating goes, I would recommend just giving up this middle seat. Place the 2 seats in the outboard position because you're going to have an awful lot more room and it's going to be easier to get to the child seats. Part of the reason you'll want these child seats in the outboard seating position anyway is because of this plunging rear line here. It does make the CLA look very, very sexy in terms of side profile, but it really hampers both rearward visibility and entrance and exit from the car. It also really makes it a little bit more difficult to bend down and get someone in and out of a child seat. It does make it even a little bit tricky to get the child seat in and out of the car because, as you can see here, you can't just pull the child seat out of the CLA. It's just not possible because of the size of it. You actually do have to rotate the seat and then pull it out that way. That's not something that you have to do in a traditional sedan. Definitely not something you have to do in a Mercedes-Benz C-Class or an E-Class or any of Mercedes-Benz traditionally shaped sedans. The CLA, keep in mind, is that 4-door coupe profile, and that does represent just a little bit of a compromise in the back. Well, you'd be hard-pressed to fit 3 child seats in the back of the CLA. We do have a very generous cargo area. The trunk at over 13 cubic feet is more mid-sized sedan than compact sedan in terms of size. This is the largest roller bag you can carry in a domestic flight. You can easily toss it in there with the 3 child seats. Well, it may have sounded like the CLA 250 didn't score too well in the child seat test. It really depends on what you're after or what you're expecting from the CLA 250. If you're expecting Accord, Fusion, Mazda 6, Camry-like accommodations in the rear, then you will be very disappointed. The CLA 250 isn't trying for that, however. The CLA 250 does give you a better rear seat experience than something like a BMW 235M. It's relatively comparable to the Audi A3 sedan. The Audi A3 is a little bit more accommodating in the rear, but the difference isn't that big. Even the difference between this and a Volvo S60 isn't that huge in relative terms. The CLA follows all of the Mercedes 4-door coupe design themes, and that really just means that the rear seat passengers take the rear seat to the front passengers. You're going to find less room back there, a little bit less comfort, definitely less headroom, all in the name of style and having those seats as available should you actually need them. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2014 Mercedes-Benz CLA 250. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. We should have a full and complete review on this CLA 250 coming up in the next day or so. So if that link at the bottom of your screen in a few moments doesn't work right now, then go ahead and check back in a few days. It'll work very soon. You can also comment on this video, share this video, tell me what you liked and didn't like about the video or about the Mercedes-Benz CLA 250 in general. You can find me at facebook.com/AlexandAutos, and you can always send me an email to alex@alexandautos.com. We'll see you next week.